So I go by a few names. Margaret Jakovac is the scholarly name. I'm a budding researcher, not even in a PhD, just finished a grad cert. And my presentation is, hey miss, are you a real teacher? Australian media representations of teaching STEM out of field. I'm an Australian-based journo, out of field teaching podcaster, and 1 day a week teacher, also known as, oh, this is going to go too fast. Okay. I might have to, I'm hoping it's not going to go too fast for me. Okay. So the overview: out of field teaching is education's dirty little secret and systemic. It's a complex and a curse phenomenon, and it lacks an agreed international definition. Yes, I know Hobbes and others are working and have worked and developed quite a new definition. We're just waiting for that to take the world by storm. So what does mass media, okay, I got to start again, guys. Sorry about this. I might just have to do it like this because it's misbehaving a little bit. So that was the overview. So what does mass media as a powerful influence on public discourse offer about conceptualizations of out-of-field teaching? And if you're not seeing a picture of a dog, you're seeing my actual screen. Okay, so this is an overview. The research lens I used: Australian media, national and state online public-facing print publications, a small sample of 26 articles, 5 years to December 2021. Theories and models: qualitative, interpretivism, constitutive model, meta model of communication, media representation theory, mediatization theory. There's a few there, yes. Methodology: scoping review, and the methods: problematization approach, reflexive thematic analysis using a bricolage methodological approach. My presentation is going to look a bit different because I come at this as a journalist, finding my way in scholarly research. So obviously it looks quite different to everyone else's and probably sounds different. The findings in brief: this is me doing the headlines, say the most important things are high up. The out-of-field STEM teaching phenomenon is mostly problematized as indicative of the teacher shortage, contributing to teachers' overwork, and negatively impacting student learning outcomes through shortcomings in teacher quality and teaching quality. So it showed media representations as perpetuating an oversimplification of a continuing complex phenomenon. No uniform definition. In fact, in those 26 articles, there were 17 different terms, descriptors. The voices of students, parents, and success stories about out-of-field teaching of STEM and school leaders' role in workforce allocation were all silenced. So the implications: it exacerbates distrust in teachers, erodes their professionalism, shifts blame to them for inadequately preparing students for a STEM future workforce. Okay, and my research question: how do Australian media represent teaching STEM out of field? Oops, going a bit too far. Background to out-of-field teaching of STEM. The simple definition of out-of-field teaching: when educators teach a subject or specialisation or stage for which they don't hold initial teacher qualifications. The Australian Institute of Teaching and School Leadership figures revealed a wide disparity between the likelihood of out-of-field teaching happening for science and maths, yet the media, public discourse keep focusing on these as part of the STEM teacher shortage. STEM savvy students are seen as crucial for Australia's future productivity. Finkel was the chief scientist for some time. He's no longer. Mismanaging teacher allocation using out-of-field STEM teachers has consequences for multiple stakeholders, including teachers, school context, education systems, student equity, future employees, and the smooth functioning of society. There's a lot there. The media as a prism of public discourse offers insights into portrayals, representations, and conceptualizations. Okay, theoretical lens of my research. Well, this was my view. Most research into media representations of teachers do not harness media and communications theories. They start at a different point. So I wanted to bring into this research my qualifications and experience in communications, media, and journalism. So these are the theories I use from that field: constitutive meta model communication, So communication models should be of and for communication. It creates meaning or social construction. And this model guided me in seeing mass media as contributing to a public discourse that shapes a reality about the out-of-field teaching of STEM. And next, my research looked into how and why those media representations were constructed and the underpinning processes. Journalism is an ideological profession, so I need to be mindful of media organisations. Gosh, I'm the editor here as I go. Political position. So I've pulled up this, which is Politiqual's media bias chart. So it shows where all the different publications, media organisations sit. As part, my scope for this research paper didn't say exactly where all the 26 articles were sitting, but I needed to be mindful of the political background. So this leads me to Hall's media representation theory. It's from cultural studies. The media does not represent a meaning which is already there, but the representation itself, the depiction, offers meaning. And it sees meanings as fluid, not static. You can't bracket power from the issue of representation. And that leads to mediatization theory. It's not media-centric, but media-centered. So the main object of attention lies elsewhere in a domain such as politics, religion, or in my case with this work, education. My research was media-centered, for that's the lens through which I explore education, analyse my data using academic, journalistic, and reflexive conventions. Okay, methodology and methods approach. I use Backey's questions to identify implications, assumptions, effects of the media's representation of teaching. My initial sample was actually global, nearly 13,000 pieces, using online news databases and Google. I reduced it to 20 articles just about Australia to make it feasible. I used reflexive thematic analysis, and my unit of analysis was concept, then a theme. Just a bit of a squiz, if I can bring it up, at my inclusion and exclusion criteria. A lot of detail there, but and the next one was the coding prompts. So what kind of questions I asked as I went through all the coding. Okay, so analysis. So I've come up with 3 themes: teacher quality and teaching qualities impact on student learning outcomes, teacher supply and demand issues, and teacher work conditions. So I explored these 3. And the first one, teacher or teaching quality. There are very few explicit definitions and little insight into this in the media representations. They rarely cited ATSL, the Australian Institute of Teaching and School Leadership's agreed standards for accreditation and registration. And they often pointed to a lack of content knowledge rather than pedagogy, or both, even when principles were quoted. They focused on educators' initial teaching education degrees, not what they'd done in the classroom. So the 17 descriptors, there were heaps basically in these 4 categories of qualifications, performance, expertise, and specialisations. Sometimes it almost sounded like the teachers had no qualifications. So it was quite confusing language. Still on the first theme, so we're looking at the impact of teacher and teaching qualities on students' learning outcomes. So the media representation fixated on a binary, teachers being in or out of field, when the reality is more nuanced, such as being near field or boundary crossing, as has explained. Teachers were depicted as struggling, lacking agency as to where and how they work, so definitely a deficit model. There were little insights into the complexity of how schools and education systems work. The media focused on international tests, such as PISA and TIMSS, as metrics for learning outcomes, not what experts saw as useful knowledge and skills for future STEM savvy workers. It led to the conceptualization of out-of-field teaching as inferior, or sorry, out-of-field teachers as inferior, resulting in poorer student outcomes. Second theme, teacher supply, demand, and solutions. Sorry, I don't actually talk about solutions in this piece. because that's quite a bit of detail. Didn't think I had enough time. Okay, media representations offered several reasons for the teacher shortage, including a lack of workforce data, workforce conditions, attrition, declining enrolments in IT degrees, competition for teachers from non-government schools, the COVID-19 pandemic, and bizarrely, some media representations blamed students' subject choices and their increasing numbers. So while you had all this publicity about, yes, we need our students, we need our younger generation to be STEM savvy and to boost productivity for the world, for Australia. Those students choosing the STEM subjects meant there was a shortage of teachers to teach those subjects. So therefore, out-of-field teachers had to do it. So it just it sounded like a horrible cycle. So theme 2, continuing with that, a key issue for this theme was the lack of quality workforce data. And I know that that's been discussed and raised often in this space. The Tasmanian Advocate quoted a former mathematics teacher saying it was very convenient to say that they don't collect the data to that level. It allows them to deny the extent of any problem. Indeed, it allows them never to discover that they may have one, as in a problem. So this is me using my journalism speak. Education departments weaponise the lack of publicly available data to deflect discourse about the shortage and whether it had become a crisis. They embraced a scattergun approach to solving the shortage across the country. So the third theme, over the 5 years to December last year, there was a crescendo of unions, educators, principals, and educational researchers' voices representing teachers as overloaded with work, with those conditions contributing to the crisis in education. So IT News had this quote, "Resourcing is so tight that teachers are being pushed into disciplines they aren't qualified in. At the same time as hours are longer, pay is less, and ongoing employment is uncertain." So The Guardian last year also had this quote from a teacher, "I am the teacher that can teach engineering. So I'm writing curriculum, teaching other teachers, and have no ability to apply for positions of responsibility as we have no one to cover my subjects." So teacher workloads were represented as excessive, linked to teaching out of field, including STEM, and these conditions at times led to attrition. Discussion and results. Okay. Oops, but there we are. Underpinning assumptions and presumptions and assumptions. Journalists must simplify and distill complex issues into stories that tweens, that is under 13-year-olds kind of thing, can understand. It often reduced out-of-field teaching of STEM to negative formulaic news with a protagonist, such as the education department, and antagonist unions. It embraced dialogue quote to feature spokespeople with power, the above, industry chiefs, associations, researchers, and policymakers. And this tallies with Hall's theory of representation, that power is embedded in the media representation and should be explored. So other presumptions and assumptions. Implicitly, the media appear to be calling out teachers for being fake, not qualified to teach their classes, an expose that flips the unspoken societal expectation of only having in-field teachers. Highlighting out-of-fieldness, negative, potentially nudges parents to question the qualifications of their children's teachers. Parents as consumers, yep, neoliberalism bent. The problematization is a manifestation of mediatization, where the media seeks to shape educational, institutional, and cultural change in society. Getting close to the end here. So basically with discussions and results, I've brought these into about 5 categories. I'm not sure if I'm sharing all of them with you today, but the main ones, yes. So portals to new pedagogies. Media representation fixate on a deficit model for out-of-field teaching as a uniform cohort of lower quality educators than their in-field peers. There's a little acknowledgement that each teacher draws on signature pedagogies. As well, teachers bring their in-field pedagogies to their out-of-field areas. That implies that out-of-field teachers, the representations imply that out-of-field teachers do not learn, despite being learning experts and, to quote Atzel, on a journey of continuous learning cycle. So quick fix strategies, escaping scrutiny. That was another thing that I could see in the media representations. Principals, school leaders and principal groups' voices were represented, but rarely to critique the workforce allocation decisions. Their practices lacked scrutiny. The education system escapes scrutiny because it regularly publicly states, hey, we've got a strategy to deal with this issue, but not much success to show for it and little questioning. Media representation shifted responsibility for policy strategy implementation to the school level. And these were supposed quick fixes that created disconnected policies. Okay, getting there. Silence of the crammed. Media representations leave unproblematic the unquantified threshold for teacher overwork. I just have no idea what's enough, what's not enough, what's reasonable, what's not. You just don't get that sense reading these media articles. The profession crams more accountability, admin work, student welfare responsibilities, and out-of-field teaching, etc., into their workday. Policymakers are represented as using subjective measures of teachers' workload and stress rather than rigorous data sources that detail how teachers use their time. That paucity of data again. Quantitative data talks and influences. Its existence may convince policymakers that teachers need more support, less work, and better work-life balance. Conclusion, getting there. So like journalists who cycle through rounds, out-of-field teachers are on the same trajectory, effectively gig workers. But public discourse and media representations diverge at this point. Writers gain knowledge, expertise, skills, and sometimes prestige as they move through gigs. Out-of-field teachers, meanwhile, have a much bumpier journey. The more support their school context offers, the more success they experience, but that success can be fleeting. The out-of-field classroom experience rarely builds expertise recognised within the education system. So the Australian STEM teacher shortage is highlighted as woeful for the nation's prosperity, yet that assumption is unquestioned. And put into context too that global tech companies are sacking great swathes of their workforce. It's more a strategic move. They've kind of overhired, but these are people, these are jobs that that the media representations are kind of pushing our students into, but will those jobs still be there? So where are we? So what is at risk is a slow or no resolution due to poor consensus on the phenomenon's definition, as in the media, compassion fatigue from repeated stories about the shortage of STEM teachers, the short political cycle, plus a lack of bipartisan nationwide agreement on long-term policy fixes. But last Friday's Australian Education Roundtable does offer hope. Okay, limitations of research, small sample size. Only looked at Aussie media that were public-facing and online, didn't talk to the journalists about why they covered the issues as they did, missed the opportunity to do some quantitative content analysis. Where to next? Well, could do an international comparison of mass media coverage of out-of-field teaching of STEM, but I'm going this way. I'm going to do, hopefully, fingers crossed, using ethnography to explore social media for success stories of out-of-field teaching of STEM. So just a couple more slides. You can find the whole 12,000 word research paper on Medium. Just search for Margaret Payton. That's my Medium name. And a little bit of a plug here for a podcast I've started. It's supposed to be a repository of different voices in the space. And I'd love to speak to each of you and quiz you for that. Okay.